LifePoint, Pastor Chad here with this week's Ask a Pastor. So, this week's question: how did we get the Bible? The 66 books of the Bible in the order they're in. Who chose them? Where did we get it from? And why were some books excluded? First of all, I want to dispel a myth. There's a myth out there that the books of the Bible were created at the Council of Nicaea around in the 300s. This couldn't be further from the truth. The canon, the books of the Bible, weren't even discussed at the Council of Nicaea at all. We have pretty good records of it. The only councils, the early church councils, that discussed the canon were the councils of Carthage, Laodicea, and Hippo, not Nicaea. So how did they choose the 66 books of the Bible? Well, there are 4 main criteria that were used to select them. First, apostolicity. It's a big word that actually just means connected to an apostle or written by an apostle themselves. John would be a perfect example. The Gospel of John, the Gospel of Matthew, both apostles followed Jesus around and both wrote a gospel. Therefore, their writings make it in. Paul's letters, same thing. An apostle called by the risen Christ, his writings make it into the Bible. The second category is what we call the rule of faith or orthodoxy. Did these writings fit with the rule of faith in the church? Basically, did the writing harmonize with the rest of Scripture? Right? This is how books like Hebrews were able to make it in, because the content contained in the letter to the Hebrews fits the rest of Scripture. If it didn't, it probably didn't belong. So the third criteria is what we call antiquity. Were the writings dated accurately? Do they fit the timing of the writer? What do I mean by this? Paul's writings, all written between the late 40s to late 60s AD, all of his letters to the churches in Galatia, Philippi, Colossae, Thessalonica, all these different churches, Paul wrote letters to them. They're accounted for in the end of Acts, actually, and so do the dates line up in the end of Acts with the writings of Paul's letters? They do, perfectly, actually. So that is one of the examples of antiquity being the third criteria for canonicity. This is also one of the ones that was able the councils to exclude a lot of writings like the Gospel of Peter or other things like the Shepherd of Hermas, because their dating, their connection to an apostle just didn't fit, so they don't make sense. All right, the fourth criteria is an example of what we call ecclesiastical acceptance. This is just a fancy way of saying, did the church accept it? Was that writing in wide usage or wide acceptance in the church at the time it was written? Did the church, the early first Christians, did they accept it as being written by who they said it was written by? Like Paul's letters, for example. Did the early church accept, like in Philippi or Thessalonica or Colossae, did they accept these writings as being from the Apostle Paul? Now, none of these standards is used as a standalone standard. They all work together. These criteria, the 4 criteria, work together to build a picture, and this is what was used in a lot of cases to exclude a lot of writings like Enoch. This doesn't mean that these books don't have elements of historical accuracy. Another example of this would be the apocryphal writings, like 1st and 2nd Maccabees, for example. These are accounts of the Maccabean revolt, which are historically accurate, but they just don't rise to the level of the inspired canon like the rest of the writings do. I hope this has really helped you understand how we got the basics of how we got the 66 books of the Bible in the order that they're in. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and I recommend digging a little bit more into the study if you want to know more. God bless.